The maintenance crew's metal detector went absolutely berserk when it passed over the shallow end of Willow Creek HOA's community pool. What they pulled up from beneath the decorative rocks made seasoned pool technician Mike Rodriguez drop his net and call the police immediately. Dozens of waterproof containers, filled with what appeared to be thousands of dollars in cash, jewelry, and documents bearing the name Karen Whitmore, HOA board president. But that wasn't even the strangest part. Hidden among the containers was a detailed map of every house in the subdivision, complete with notes about resident schedules, vacation plans, and what Karen cryptically labeled as violation opportunities. The final container held something that made Mike's blood run cold: keys. Lots of them, each tagged with an address. Karen arrived at the pool area 20 minutes later, her usual power-walking stride faltering when she spotted the police cars. Detective Lisa Chen held up one of the waterproof bags, its contents clearly visible through the transparent plastic. "Mrs. Whitmore, we need to talk." Karen's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine: shock, fear, indignation, then finally settling on her trademark condescending smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Anyone could have put those there, including your social security card and birth certificate." Detective Chen raised an eyebrow, along with what appears to be duplicate keys to half the homes in this neighborhood. The small crowd of residents that had gathered began whispering among themselves. Mrs. Patterson from 42 Maple clutched her pearls. "Is that why my garden gnomes kept moving? I thought I was losing my mind." Karen straightened her shoulders, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had terrorized the subdivision for 3 years. "As HOA president, I have every right to conduct property inspections. Everything I've done has been perfectly legal and in accordance with our covenants." "Property inspections?" Detective Chen's voice rose. "Mrs. Whitmore, these documents suggest something far more serious than property inspections." Karen's lawyer-trained mind began calculating her options. She'd been so careful, so methodical. The pool had been the perfect hiding spot. Who would think to look there? But now, standing in her designer tracksuit with half the neighborhood staring at her like she'd grown a second head, she realized her carefully constructed world was crumbling. "I want to speak to my attorney," she said finally. "That's your right," Detective Chen nodded. "But first, I need you to explain why you have keys to properties you don't own and detailed surveillance notes on your neighbors' daily routines." The question hung in the air like chlorine gas. Karen looked around at the faces surrounding her, people she'd fined for lawn infractions, cited for mailbox violations, and reported for parking infractions. Now they were looking at her with a mixture of fear and disgust that made her stomach churn. For the first time in years, Karen Whitmore had no comeback ready. The emergency HOA meeting was standing room only. Karen sat at the front table, flanked by her attorney, and what remained of her dignity. The community center buzzed with angry whispers and nervous energy. She'd called thousands of these meetings over the years, but never as the accused. Board member Tom Richards cleared his throat. "Given recent developments, we're here to discuss Mrs. Whitmore's continued role as HOA president." "Alleged developments," Kellerman interjected, earning eye rolls from the crowd. Sarah Martinez stood up, clutching a manila folder. "I'd like to read from my security camera footage logs. 3 weeks ago, Karen Whitmore entered my backyard at 2:17 a.m. to measure my garden shed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen felt heat rising in her cheeks. That particular inspection had been perfectly justified. Sarah's shed was clearly 6 inches too close to the property line. "That was a routine property compliance check," Karen said, her voice carrying its old authority. "The covenants clearly state." "The covenants don't give you the right to break into our homes," shouted Jim Patterson from the back row. "You went through my garage, Karen. You touched my tools, moved my lawnmower. I have it on video." More voices joined in, creating a crescendo of accusations. Karen looked around the room at faces she'd known for years, people she genuinely believed she was helping by maintaining community standards. Now they looked at her like she was a stranger, a dangerous stranger. "I was protecting property values," she said, standing up. "Every single thing I did, was to maintain the standards that make Willow Creek the premier subdivision in the county. By stealing from us. Mrs. Chen's voice cut through the noise. My grandmother's jewelry was in one of your little treasure chests, Karen. Jewelry that went missing after you came by to inspect my water heater. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The jewelry had been sitting right there on Mrs. Chen's dresser, practically begging to be taken. It wasn't theft. It was temporary relocation for safekeeping. At least, that's how she'd rationalized it. I was keeping it safe, she stammered. The room exploded in angry shouts. Tom Richards banged his gavel repeatedly, but Karen could barely hear it over the blood rushing in her ears. How had it come to this? She'd started with such good intentions. The subdivision had been falling apart when she took over, lawns going unmowed, mailboxes falling into disrepair, property values declining. She'd fixed all of that. She'd made Willow Creek perfect. But somewhere along the way, perfect hadn't been enough. She'd needed control. Complete, absolute control over every blade of grass, every paint color, every flower planted. And when residents resisted, she'd found ways to make them comply. The keys had just been tools. The money had been incentive. The surveillance had been necessary. I motioned to remove Karen Whitmore as HOA president, effective immediately, Sarah Martinez announced. Seconded, came a chorus of voices. Karen watched her empire crumble in real time. 3 years of careful construction destroyed in a single vote. But as she looked around the room at the faces of people she'd terrorized in the name of community standards, she felt something unexpected, relief. For the first time in years, someone else would be making the decisions. Someone else would bear the burden of keeping Willow Creek perfect. But as Detective Chen appeared in the doorway with a pair of handcuffs, Karen realized her troubles were just beginning. The interrogation room at Willow Creek Police Department smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. Karen sat across from Detective Chen, her manicured fingers drumming against the metal table in a rhythm that betrayed her growing anxiety. Her attorney, David Kellerman, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Let's start simple, Detective Chen said, sliding a photograph across the table. This is your handwriting, correct? Karen glanced at the image, her own meticulous notes about the Hendersons' vacation schedule. I refused to answer without understanding the charges against me. Breaking and entering. Burglary, stalking, identity theft. Chen ticked off each charge on her fingers. Should I continue? Kellerman leaned forward. Detective, my client has been the HOA president for 3 years. Her responsibilities include property oversight. Property oversight doesn't include hiding cash in community pools or keeping detailed logs of when residents leave their houses. Chen interrupted. Mrs. Whitmore, we found over $47,000 in those containers. Where did that money come from? Karen's composure cracked slightly. The money was her insurance policy, her escape fund for when things inevitably went south. But she couldn't say that without incriminating herself further. HOA fees, she said finally. I was safeguarding community funds. In Tupperware containers at the bottom of a swimming pool. Chan's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. Mrs. Whitmore, we've been in contact with your HOA's treasurer. The community account is fully intact. This appears to be personal money. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Karen's mind raced through possible explanations, each one more ridiculous than the last. How could she explain that the money came from her consulting fees, payments from residents who wanted to avoid citations, or who needed special approval for modifications that technically violated HOA rules? I exercise financial discretion in my role as president, she said carefully. Kellerman shot her a warning look, but Karen was past caring about legal strategy. 3 years of wielding absolute power over Willow Creek had made her believe she was untouchable. Even now, sitting in a police interrogation room with her entire life imploding, she couldn't quite accept that the rules applied to her. And the keys? Chen pressed. 23 duplicate keys to homes you don't own. Emergency access. Karen replied automatically. For property inspections and safety concerns. Did the homeowners know you had these keys? Karen's hesitation was answer enough. The truth was, she'd been collecting keys for months. snatching spares during friendly visits, making copies when residents trusted her with temporary access, even hiring a locksmith under false pretenses. Each key had felt like gaining another piece of control over her domain. Mrs. Whitmore, Chen leaned back in her chair. We've spoken to 17 of your neighbors today. Would you like to know what they told us? Karen's throat felt suddenly dry. She could imagine the stories, years of petty tyranny coming back to haunt her. Mrs. Chen's unauthorized entry to check her fence height. The Johnsons' missing packages that mysteriously reappeared after Karen's inspections. The elaborate schemes to catch residents in violation of increasingly arbitrary rules. They're lying, she whispered, but even she didn't believe it anymore. 6 months later, Karen sat in her court-appointed therapist's office, staring at a motivational poster about letting go. House arrest had given her time to think, too much time. The ankle monitor chafed against her skin, a constant reminder of how far she'd fallen. Tell me about the pool, Dr. Morrison said, her pen poised over a legal pad. Karen laughed bitterly. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But that pool, it was the one place in Willow Creek I couldn't control. Couldn't regulate the temperature of the water. Couldn't dictate who swam when. So I made it mine. By hiding your possessions there. By claiming it, Karen corrected. Every time I put something in those containers, I was marking territory, like a dog peeing on a fire hydrant. Dr. Morrison scribbled notes. And the money? Karen closed her eyes, remembering. Mrs. Peterson offered me $200 to overlook her rose bushes that were technically too close to the sidewalk. I should have reported her, but it felt good, having that power. So I started accepting more consulting fees. People paid me to look the other way, or to approve their modifications without going through proper channels. You were essentially running a protection racket in your own neighborhood. The words stung because they were true. I told myself I was being flexible, helping neighbors avoid bureaucracy. But really, Karen paused, the truth finally crystallizing. Really, I was drunk on power, and scared. Scared of what? Of being ordinary, Karen whispered. Before I became HOA president, I was just another suburban housewife with too much time on her hands. But then I had authority. People had to listen to me, respect me, fear me. When residents started complaining to the board about my methods, I panicked. I needed leverage to keep them in line. Dr. Morrison nodded encouragingly. Hence the surveillance. I told myself it was for the good of the community, but I was addicted to knowing everyone's secrets. Who was having affairs, who was struggling financially, who was planning to sell. Information was power, and power was the only thing that made me feel significant. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Karen had spent months constructing elaborate justifications for her behavior, but stripped of her title and her authority, the truth was impossible to ignore. She'd been a bully with a clipboard, terrorizing people who'd done nothing wrong except live in the same neighborhood. The preliminary hearing is next week, she said quietly. My lawyer thinks I might avoid jail time if I cooperate fully and make restitution. How does that make you feel? Karen considered the question. Terrified, relieved, ashamed. She looked out the window at the parking lot, where normal people were going about their normal lives without anyone monitoring their every move. I keep thinking about Mrs. Chen's jewelry. It was her grandmother's. She cried when the police returned it. Guilt is a normal part of the healing process. Is it healing, though? Karen asked. Or is it just consequences? Before Dr. Morrison could answer, Karen's phone buzzed with a text message. Her replacement as HOA president was asking for advice about pool maintenance. Karen stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some questions, she realized, didn't deserve answers. But late that night, as she walked past her bedroom window and saw the community pool glittering in the moonlight, she wondered if her sealed containers were still down there waiting, and whether the new HOA president would be strong enough to resist their call.